homes in India. My name is David Anderson. I'm the Outreach Director for the International Society for Peace and Justice, and I'll be your moderator for today. First of all, I would like to share that today we complete 1 year of this series of congressional briefings. Starting on June 16th, we have organized 25 briefings hosted by 18 civil rights organizations representing Christian, Muslim, and Hindu faiths, as well as non-faith-based organizations. Our briefings over the past year have featured various members of the U.S. Congress, including senators, and the chair and commissioners of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF. Leading civil rights activists from India and the US have also regularly joined and spoken at our briefings. Organizations that have regularly appeared at our briefings include Amnesty International USA, Human Rights Watch, and Genocide Watch. Today's topic is one that demands the international community's immediate attention because the world's largest democracy has now stooped to the new low of arresting minorities who dare to protest against hate speech and bulldozing their homes in order to frighten them into silence. Recently, Nupur Sharma, a spokesperson for Prime Minister Modi's Bihar BJP, went on air to make hateful and blasphemous remarks about Islam and the revered Prophet Muhammad. Muslims were rightfully outraged and took to the streets in protest. Remember, this is not the first time a member of the ruling party has made hateful remarks about Muslims. In fact, it's an everyday occurrence in India. Sharma's remarks were simply the final straw after several years of Muslims being publicly called parasites, anti-nationals, infiltrators, thugs, invaders, terrorists, rapists, and criminals. Muslims were well within their right to protest against Sharma, who has since been suspended from the party. But the police, who have long been compromised by influences from the Hindu supremacist movement, responded with brute force and arrests in droves. As we speak, Muslim men in Uttar Pradesh state are being beaten in prisons by police. 2 Muslims from Jharkhand state were shot in cold blood, one of them only 15 years old. But the Hindu nationalist state did not stop there in its punishment of Muslims. Just days ago, the home of Muslim activist Afreen Fatima, where she lived with her family, was demolished in broad daylight under the blatantly false pretense that Fatima's father had masterminded a protest. Her family did not even have a chance to remove their belongings from their home. This is not just a tragedy for Fatima and her family. This is a tragedy that should enrage the world because it is a clear tactic used by the BJP government to attempt to silence anyone who speaks out against them. This is unacceptable. Today, we will be hearing from several panelists on the grave situation in India and why the international community needs to take action. We also have a very important guest speaker who has prepared remarks for us today. Afreen Fatima herself has taken the time to record a presentation for this congressional briefing today, so make sure you don't miss her message. Before jumping into our speaker presentations, let us watch a short video titled India Genocide News, released by the Indian American Muslim Council, encapsulating the religious persecution by India's Hindu supremacist federal and state governments, especially against Muslims in the past week. Okay. You have that video?
Prominent Muslim activist Afreen Fatima's family was detained on baseless charges while their home was illegally bulldozed in Uttar Pradesh state. Fatima has called the demolition an act of vendetta against her family, leading to a new wave of protests and international condemnation. 2 Muslims were killed and 10 others were severely injured after police opened fire in Jharkhand state to quell protests by thousands of Muslims objecting to Nupur Sharma's hate speech. Police in Uttar Pradesh also attacked protesters with sticks and rocks. Muslims across India protested against the hateful remarks made by Bharatiya Janata Party spokespersons Nupur Sharma and Naveen Jindal about the Prophet Muhammad. In New Delhi, Telangana, Kashmir, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, and West Bengal states, protesters called for Sharma and Jindal to be arrested. Police in Uttar Pradesh have targeted and arrested over 50 people, mainly Muslims, after a bout of communal violence in Kanpur city. Muslim residents have reported their family members being arrested on baseless charges and physically assaulted by police. Hindu extremists assaulted and physically abused 3 Muslim panhandlers in Uttar Pradesh state. In a video, a Hindu extremist can be seen hurling Islamophobic abuses and forcing his victims to chant praise to Lord Ram. BJP parliamentarian Anant Kumar Hegde made an anti-Muslim hate speech claiming that as long as Islam exists, terrorism will also exist, and that uprooting Islam is the way to uproot terrorism. He is one of 38 BJP leaders identified for offending religious sentiments. At an event, Hindu supremacist leader Yati Narsinganand called for the economic boycott of Muslims in Kashmir and across India. Narsinganand is a serial offender in terms of hate speech, repeatedly calling for violence against Muslims and insulting Islam. Hindu supremacist group leader Radha Krishna Adyanta made a hate speech at an event saying Islam is not a religion, it is rape culture. He also referred to Muslims as looters and a gang of rapists.
Okay, let's now move on to our panelists. We start with Govind Acharya, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, who has been the India Kashmir specialist for Amnesty International USA for 2 decades. Govind has also worked in Afghanistan, opening Amnesty International's office in Kabul, and served on Amnesty USA's board of directors from 2013 to 2019. Go ahead, Govind.
Thank you for having me at this. It's always very difficult when asked to speak at this because we see the deterioration of human rights that has been ongoing in the past decade in India, and it's disheartening. But I'm here to talk about just the immediate past week or so. In fact, in the past few days, as the video had mentioned, thousands of people took to the streets of Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, Jammu and Kashmir, and Telangana, calling for the arrest of Nupur Sharma and Naveen Kumar Jindal, who are former spokespersons for the BJP, which is India's ruling party, as you know, for making statements that were deemed insulting of the Prophet Muhammad in primetime news debate. And so we in Amnesty is calling on Indian authorities to immediately put an end to the excessive use of force in response to large-scale protests in the country that has resulted in the death of at least 2 people, including a child, and many others who many others who suffered injuries since Friday. We also call for the immediate and unconditional release of those who have been arbitrarily arrested solely for peacefully exercising the rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, which are guaranteed by India's constitution. The government of India is selectively and viciously cracking down on Muslims who dare to speak up and peacefully express their dissent against discrimination faced by them. They're cracking down on protesters with excessive use of force, arbitrary detention, and punitive house demolitions, which I'll get to in a minute, by Indian authorities, which is in complete violation of India's commitments under international human rights law and standards. So let me talk about one incident. This was on June 10th, where and it happened in Ranchi, the state capital of, or the capital of the state of Jharkhand in eastern India, bordering West Bengal. Police went on a rampage using batons, and they used pelting stones and shot bystanders during these protests. Another bystander was shot 6 times by the police while returning from the market. 2 protesters, including a 15-year-old child, was fatally shot in the head by the police. Under the United Nations Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by law enforcement officials, police are only permitted to use force for legitimate law enforcement purposes, and it has to be proportionate, and firearms should only be used as a last resort and only when strictly necessary to protect themselves or others against imminent threat of death or serious injury. Now let's get to Uttar Pradesh, which is which I think others probably will discuss as well. There was another video which showed a police officer repeatedly hitting detained male protesters with batons in Saharanpur in Uttar Pradesh while they cry in fear and pain. And one protester complained of a fractured arm. Now, this is where it is absolutely horrific. Instead of criticizing the use of force, so the use of force happened, which should not have happened, but instead of criticizing the use of force, it was in fact celebrated by former police officers and BJP politicians on social media. It's absolutely unacceptable for striking with a baton while someone is under a control, and is unnecessary and disproportionate, and it is a way to use it as punishment. It amounts to torture and amounts to inhumane and degrading treatment, which is a violation of international law. And in a further blow to human rights, which has gotten widespread, but not enough attention, I think, the authorities carried out an unlawful and arbitrary demolition of houses belonging to Muslims, suspected of being, quote, key conspirators of the violence that erupted during the protests in Prayagraj, Uttar Pradesh. For example, on June 10th, activist Javed Mohammed, his wife and younger daughter were detained along with many others by the police. On June 11th, a backdated notice was pasted on the wall of the family's house at 11 p.m. the night before the planned demolition. Javed Mohammed and his elder daughter, Afreen Fatima, a student activist, have been vocal in their criticism of the government, especially against the Discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act, as well they should be. It is as I said, discriminatory and bigoted piece of legislation. While the authorities cited supposedly illegal construction as the reason for demolition, the notice was issued in the name of Javed Mohammed, who did not even own the demolished property. And on June 12th, the authorities demolished the two-story house, which amounts to a punitive measure and of course, a flagrant violation of the right to housing. Houses of many other protesters were similarly demolished in Uttar Pradesh. It is evident that the absence of any genuine consultation and complete departure from the due process of law, these demolitions are absolutely a violation of the right to adequate housing, which India is a state party to under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And so they are absolutely in violation of international human rights law in that case as well, and has been done solely to inflict punishment on the community and those individuals for raising their voices against injustice. And it is, just to conclude, this is absolutely a deplorable response by the government, various governments in India for in an attempt to suppress dissent. The Indian authorities must stop this. They must also investigate and prosecute anyone who has committed these human rights violations. And victims must be compensated as well for any of the damage done to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Govind, from Amnesty International USA. Our next speaker is Amin Zama, the Associate Director for the Indian American Muslim Council. He has served the cause of Indian Muslims and other minorities for over 16 years. He has been involved in organizing and leading protests against persecution of minorities in India, as well as in outreach with members of Congress in the United States to spread awareness about massive human rights and religious freedom violations in India. Amin has worked actively in the civil rights community in Boston and Massachusetts and helped build the community. Go ahead, Amin. Go ahead, Amin.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I want to start by saying that dissent is not only a protected right in any established democracy, but it is also essential to the health of the nation. And to quote former Vice President Hubert Humphrey, freedom is hammered out on the anvil of discussion, dissent, and debate. This is why when a democracy begins to attack its own people, particularly its most vulnerable minorities, simply for speaking out against the wrongdoings of the government, it becomes cause for international concern. This is exactly what we are seeing happening in India today. Last week, Nupur Sharma, a spokesperson for Prime Minister Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, made hateful and blasphemous comments against Islam and the revered Prophet Muhammad during a television debate. Rightfully offended, Indian Muslims took to the streets in protest, calling for Sharma to face adequate consequences for her hate speech. Rather than uphold the constitutional right to dissent, Indian police have responded with a brutal crackdown against Muslim protesters. Videos from a number of Indian states have shown the shockingly normalized police violence faced by Muslims, from baton beatings to being pelted with stones. Two Muslims, one of them a 15-year-old, were shot dead in the Indian state of Jharkhand after police opened fire on a peaceful protest. None of these tragedies have been condemned by Modi, and certainly not by Modi's supporters at the state level. In fact, the governor of Jharkhand, Ramesh Bais, explicitly asked why water cannons, rubber bullets, and tear gas were not used against Muslim protesters. He further demanded that the names, faces, and addresses of protesters be made public so that the public could also identify them. This crackdown is still ongoing to this day. The arrest counts of Muslims who protested against Nupur Sharma's hate speech continues to increase in the states of Uttar Pradesh, Bengal, Jharkhand, and Gujarat in an attempt to criminalize Muslims for exercising their right to dissent. So far, 200 Muslims have been arrested in West Bengal, 350 in the state of Uttar Pradesh, 29 in the state of Jharkhand, and 10 in the state of Gujarat. This is a stark contrast to the scarce number of Hindu supremacists who have been arrested for mob violence against Muslims, which I will touch on more in a moment. Even more alarming is the now mainstream use of bulldozers across the country to demolish Muslim-owned homes and businesses as retribution for dissenting against the Modi regime. Just over the weekend, the international community was shocked when officials in the state of Uttar Pradesh unlawfully detained family of prominent Muslim activist Afreen Fatima and then razed their home to the ground with all their belongings still inside. The international community, as well as the Indian civil society, have rightfully responded to this pseudo law enforcement with shock and alarm. Amnesty International India has slammed this cruel and inhumane bulldozer justice as an absolute violation of the rights of adequate housing as enshrined in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, to which India is also a party. A group of former Indian Supreme Court and High Court justices have also submitted a petition to Chief Justice N.B. Ramana, condemning the demolitions as a form of collective extrajudicial punishments attributable to a state policy which is illegal. It becomes necessary to point out the stark differences between the police treatment of Indian Muslims exercising their civil rights versus the Hindu violent extremists engaging displays of aggression and even violence. In the month of April, just a few months ago, 2 Hindu festivals coincided with the month of Ramadan. Hindu extremist mob across India paraded through Muslim majority areas while armed with swords, rocks, and sticks, chanting genocidal slogans, arsoning mosques, attacking Muslim homes, and destroying Muslim-owned properties. These violent incidents were not only allowed to unfold while police were still watching, it was often the police who engaged in the rioting alongside the extremists. Meanwhile, the Muslims who retaliated in the self-defense were arrested, while Hindu violent extremists were walked free. Muslims also had their homes bulldozed in the state of Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat, as well as in the Jahangir Puri, an area in the Indian capital of New Delhi. What we are seeing today is not democracy, but the symptoms of Hindu extremism, which was corroded nearly every pillar of Indian democracy. Muslims are increasingly left with fewer and fewer rights. They are denied the right to protest. They are denied the right to critique Modi through journalism. They are denied the right to security in their homes. They are denied the right to fundamental safety and security. Let me be clear that this is not just affecting activists. You do not need to be a vocal Muslim to have a target placed on your back. The BJP have proved this by demolishing the homes of poor Muslims in Delhi, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, with only the flimsiest evidence connecting them to the riots or illegal construction. This is clearly another step towards the genocide of the 220 million Muslims, and India is drawing closer to it by the day. Now is the time for the Biden administration to step in. No country, ally, or otherwise should be given a pass for genocidal policies against its minorities. We call upon President Biden to immediately and publicly denounce the Indian government's use of bulldozers and police violence against Muslims and to recognize India as a country of particular concern for its ongoing egregious violations of religious freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Amin, from IAMC. Our next speaker is Riya Chakrabarty, the Policy Director at Hindus for Human Rights, an organization that advocates for civil and human rights in South Asia and North America. She recently worked for the Armed Conflict Location and Events Data Project, where she researched political violence in the United States. And she has worked in various positions in the US Senate and the World Health Organization. Go ahead, Riya.
Apologies that I couldn't be here today, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you about how BJP-led government officials have unfairly arrested and targeted Muslim communities and demolished their homes. Across India, Muslims have taken to the street to denounce officials from India's ruling party who made derogatory comments about the Prophet Muhammad. While the BJP distanced itself from those comments, in part due to boycotts and denouncements by Gulf states, BJP-led state governments responded violently to Indian Muslims who protested the comments. Over the weekend, Afreen Fatima led one of those protests. In response, Uttar Pradesh officials demolished her family's home. UP police accused her father, Javed Mohammed, of fueling violence after Friday prayers, claimed the family stashed illegal weapons in the house, and said the family's house was an illegal bungalow. However, Mohammed and his daughter are also prominent Muslim activists and community members. Mohammed led anti-CAA protests in Allahabad, and according to their fellow CAA protesters, they were likely targeted for their activism. Police also illegally detained her family. The incident sparked widespread uproar in India. Prominent Indian opposition politicians, including Shashi Tharoor and Mahua Moitra, have roundly denounced demolition. Additionally, college students have rallied in support of Fatima. As Suchitra Vijayan of the Police Project has also documented on her Twitter, people organized additional protests against the illegal detention of Fatima's family and the demolition of their home. Again, these protesters were met with police violence and many were detained. Of course, this isn't the first time that BJP and Hindutva leaders have demolished the homes and mosques of Muslims. In April, the BJP-controlled North Delhi Municipal Corporation decided to demolish homes in Delhi's Muslim-majority Jahangirpuri neighborhood after Delhi BJP leaders lodged complaints with the corporation and alleged that Jahangirpuri residents sparked violence between Muslims and Hindus. The violence refers to Muslims who allegedly threw stones at a procession of armed Hindu extremists during Hanuman Jayanti. The processions, timed to coincide with Muslim preparations for Iftar, were all organized by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad's paramilitary wing, Bajrang Dal. During the procession, the extremists brandished swords and tridents and purposefully provoked the Muslim residents. Despite the clear role of Hindu extremists in the devolution of the procession into communal violence, police only reprimanded Muslims who allegedly threw stones at the procession. And to further punish the supposed instigators, the BJP-led authorities organized demolition drives against the Muslim residents of Jahangirpuri. When the Indian Supreme Court ordered a state to stop the demolition of Jahangirpuri, authorities ignored the court order and continued with the demolition. Similar demolition drives took place in BJP-led states in April during both Hanuman Jayanti and Ram Navami processions in Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and more. In each of these drives, Muslims were unfairly targeted. Inevitably, these bulldozers have become a symbol of Hindu nationalism. Indeed, Yogi Adityanath, the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, was nicknamed Bulldozer Baba during his re-election campaign after he promised to bulldoze the houses of criminals. His tough on crime platform and ethno-nationalist politics helped him win another term as chief minister, and at rallies, supporters brought bulldozers to support him. As Milan Vaishnav of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace notes, these bulldozers are merely the latest dog whistle for Hindu nationalists. According to Vaishnav, ultimately, everyone understands who the target is. Whether it's bulldozing, whether it's amendments to citizenship laws, whether it's dietary habits, we're seeing religion being used as a filter to determine who belongs in India today. The bulldozer is not just a tool of Hindu nationalism, but a symbol as well. and its reach extends far beyond India. Bulldozers are now a symbol of far-right authoritarian regimes around the world. As my colleague Ranchi of Hindus for Human Rights has written, the bulldozer doesn't just crop up in forced evictions in India. It is also a symbol of violent removals of Palestinians from their homes by Israeli officials. These parallels are no coincidence. Far-right politicians in Israel and India learn from each other and cooperate in their explicitly nationalist projects. The demolition drives across India can be played in parallel with the scenes from Massachusetts. Similarly, while Hindu nationalists push their way towards mosques to interrupt Ramadan prayers in India, Israeli nationalists did the same thing at Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Far-right governments, aided by far-right civil society organizations, have violently removed people from their homes just because these people cannot fit into the nationalist narratives for India and Israel. Other human rights observers have also noted the alarming parallels between the Israeli and Indian government's treatment of each country's respective minority communities. Indeed, it seems, as the Middle East Monitor perceived, that India is taking notes from the Israeli hard right and pursuing a similar strategy to create an ethno-nationalist apartheid state, where religious and cultural minorities live a separate and unequal existence. Almost 100 lawmakers across the political spectrum and from both chambers of Congress denounced the destruction of Palestinian homes in Massachusetts. And we hope they see how the Indian government targets cultural and religious minorities with similar tactics in India. To be sure, Congress has not done nearly enough to address the forced removals of Palestinians from their homes in Massachusetts and other Palestinian territories. Nor has it done enough to address the demolition of entire sections of Muslim-majority neighborhoods in India. Congress, and indeed the United States government, must do more to protect religious and cultural minorities in India. Congress should publicly denounce the continued demolition of Muslim homes, especially when these demolitions are clearly driven by ideological motives. Moreover, the US government should use its human rights toolbox, especially through the International Religious Freedom Act, to punish individuals who clearly persecuted India's religious and cultural minorities. The State Department released a report last week that chronicled the continued deterioration of religious freedom in India. Secretary Blinken made a special note of communal violence in India, and Ambassador Rashad Hussain pointed the finger squarely at Indian state officials who tolerated or even encouraged communal violence. If the US government does not follow up all of this rhetoric with concrete policy, the BJP and Hindu nationalists will continue to demolish the homes and history of Indian Muslims.
Okay. Thank you, Ria. That was a pre-recorded message. And our last speaker, last but certainly not least, we have Afreen Fatima, a globally renowned student activist from India's prestigious Nehru University in New Delhi. I apologize for not being able to pronounce that. Fatima has been at the center of a storm since last week when authorities in Uttar Pradesh state illegally and criminally demolished her house. This brutal act of persecution from the UP government has drawn criticism globally as well as in India, with the retired judges of India's Supreme Court condemning the demolition and asking India's current Chief Justice to intervene. Afreen is a former president of the Student Union of Women's College, Aligarh Muslim University. She was at the forefront of the Anti-Citizenship Amendment Act protests of 2019, protesting against the BJP's blatantly anti-Muslim citizenship policy, and she has also led protests against Karnataka state's ban on hijabs in school. Due to her outspoken and unabashed criticism of Hindu nationalism and the Modi regime, her home was bulldozed just days ago by authorities in Uttar Pradesh. It is an honor to have her speaking to us today, and we will also have a video recording of Afreen's remarks.
I am Afreen Fatima from
has been unjustly and illegally arrested by Allahabad police. And so on June 10th, there was a protest that was organized post Juma Namaz against objectionable comments that were made against Prophet Muhammad. And following the protest was a clash between the police and protesters. Police then used this to punish, humiliate, and harass Muslim leaders and activists of the town who have been active for a long time in the city, my father being one of them. At around 8:50 p.m., the police arrives at my house and asks my father to accompany them to the police station. My father readily agrees because he has been in touch with the local administration and he himself was worried about the situation that was the tense situation that was building up in the city between police and the Muslims, and we were hearing about arrests and tensions that were happening, and my father was concerned about all that was happening. He was also concerned that it is going to be a one-sided inquiry and Muslims will be punished, Muslims will pay the price. There was no warrant when he was taken away. There was no notice that was given to us when he was taken away. Police just said that they want to talk to him about what had happened. And then at around 12:30 a.m., the police again comes to our house and detains my mother and my younger sister. Again, without a warrant, without any notice, they just said that they want to take them for some investigation. Now, I must point out that at this point in time, we still did not know that our father was being suspected or was being investigated. All we knew was that he went with the police on his own vehicle to talk about what had happened in the city. When my mother and my sister were being taken, the police was aggressive, they were intimidating, and they did not give my mother or my sister the time to even process. My mother and my sister, the entire family was already anxious and stressed about why our father was taken away. Following which, we were not told, the police did not disclose with us where our father was or where our mother and sister were. Then at around 2:30 a.m., the police again comes to our house and asks my sister-in-law and me to accompany them to the police station. They denied, saying that it's late at night and it is illegal to arrest or detain women at post 6 p.m. And there's, in fact, the detention of my mother and my sister was illegal because to detain females for any inquiry or any investigation, the police first has to get a written permission from the magistrate before detaining, which was never done. When we denied that we will not be going to police, then started intimidating us into leaving our house, to vacating our house. They said that they wanted to seal our house and they wanted to lock our house from outside. We resisted and said that we will not be leaving our house. I must again point out, until this time also, we do not know where my father was or where my mother and sister were. The police stayed outside of our house until 11 a.m. the next morning and continuously pestered us and intimidated us to leave our house, to vacate our house. They did not give us a reason why, they did not tell us anything. And again, we still did not know where my father was or where my sister was. We tried to send family members to take my father's medicine to the police station, whichever police station he was in, and also my mother's medication to whichever police station she was in. The lawyers were also not allowed to meet them, and it was just a very tense and anxious situation for everyone. We did not know what was happening. We did not know that my father was being framed as the mastermind of the violence, of the clash that broke out post protests. Then at around, I think, 11 a.m. on 11th of June,
we got to know that my father was called the mastermind and that he was one of the prime suspects and that he was arrested. And this too we did not get to know from the police. We got to know this from sensational headlines of right-wing media channels. Again, the entire day, 11th of June, we had no idea where my mother and sister were taken to, which police station, what the police was doing with them. But then at around 8 p.m. on 11th of June, we got a call from my mother who, in a very distressed and hurried voice, asked us to leave the house, to vacate the house because the police said that they wanted to demolish our house. We were not served any notice until then. It was only at 11 p.m. at night when the police pasted a notice in front of on the main gate of our house, saying that we must vacate our house by 11 a.m. the next morning, and the police will, the development authorities will then come and demolish our house, citing that it was an illegal construction. We had never been given any notice prior to this particular notice. In fact, even this notice was never given to us. It was just pasted on our door. We had been paying our house tax, our water taxes, and all other, our electricity bills. Everything was registered on this house, and we had been paying all these taxes, and we were never told that our house was an illegal construction or anything of that sort. We were never served any notice prior to this. This was just a way to punish my father for being an active vocal member of the Muslim community. I must point out that the house that was then demolished is not my father's house. It belongs to my mother. My mother pays all the taxes. My mother pays the water tax, the house tax, the electricity bills, and everything. Police illegally, along with the development authorities, Allahabad development authorities, were hand in gloves with the law enforcement to illegally demolish our house. It then went on to fabricate things to incriminate my father and then to also make me a suspect of the violence that happened in Allahabad. It is an alarming trend that is being noticed in India, where law enforcement, along with the government, along with the development authorities, arbitrarily, unjustly, illegally, lawlessly demolishes Muslim households and punishes Muslims, incarcerates Muslims for no crime at all. Same thing has happened to me and my family. We're being punished, and punish is a collective punishment to the entire Muslim community. That you cannot speak up, that you should not speak up. You should not be concerned about the rising intolerance against your community. That you should not take a stand against laws like the Citizenship Amendment Act that are not just unconstitutional but inhuman and violate all sorts of human rights. The way the law enforcement has incriminated my father and the way that the right-wing media has portrayed my father points a finger towards only one direction. That is that there is some conspiracy that is being planned, that the government wants to teach Muslims who are vocal, who are concerned about community issues, and who actively work to solve community issues, to punish them, and to teach a lesson to everyone in the Muslim community. I urge everyone to not just speak up about this, but hold authorities and law enforcement and governments accountable for the arbitrary and lawless power that they exercise over Muslim bodies, Muslim houses, and Muslim lives.
Okay, thank you for that, Afreen. So for the next part of our program, we will be having a Q&A session with our live panelists, and you can submit questions now in the chat box. Let's see. I do have.
Off your wallet. I can't find it. I never put it down. I was holding it when we were walking around.
Okay, and I do have one question here. Okay, and we will be limiting this to 1 to 2 questions. First question comes from Mike Gauss. Can a case be filed against the government of can a case be filed against the government of Yogi Adityanath, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh?
Is that this is Govind from Amnesty? I think that there are a number of lawyers working on those specific cases and approaching the judiciary in Uttar Pradesh and the Supreme Court. Is that, I think so? So yes, I think beyond that, it is very difficult from unfortunately, bringing a case in the international realm is difficult because of the India is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. However, pressure should be applied in Washington with the Biden administration and in other governments to pressure the Indian government to launch an investigation and to hold the perpetrators of all of this, all of these human rights violations accountable. So the answer is yes, but much more needs to be done, and that could be, and that must be through pressure in pressuring our legislatures and governments to do more to really push the Indian government to take action against these human rights violations and to prosecute the perpetrators of these violations.
Great, thanks, Govind. Okay, and our second and final question: are there any opposition political parties in India who are in support or are helping? Anyone like to take that?
Yeah, I'm not really in it because I don't really have very specific information. I mean, there are definitely political formations that are vehemently opposed to what's happening. Both in the central, both in parliament and in different states around India. So yes, there are definitely political parties, political formations who are opposed to it, but I don't off the top of my head have details on what their positions are. I don't know if others do on the panel.
Yeah, it's sort of that sort of kind of brings up a question in my mind too, is there any sort of cohesive political opposition to the BJP? Certainly we saw earlier this year in state elections, the BJP came out way ahead, I believe everywhere that it ran. So I think seems like something that really needs to happen going forward. There needs to be a cohesive political coalition to counter these human rights abuses. And okay. And so I do see a couple other questions come in, but we do need to move on to the next part of our program. Thank you to those who are participating. Thank you to all our speakers for taking the time to join us, and thank you to everyone watching today. To wrap up, I say with no amount of hyperbole that India is now approaching the brink of fascism. It is crucial that the international community does not allow the world's largest democracy to fall into this dark trap of demolishing homes, arresting its protesters, and taking even further steps towards a genocide of 200 million Muslims. The time is now for the Biden administration, for the United Nations, and for every democratic nation to make it clear that India's hatred for Muslims will no longer be tolerated. It is long past time for India to be designated as a country of particular concern, and we urge our congressional staffers in the audience to work to make this happen as soon as possible, because lives literally depend on it. To conclude, I'd like to thank the co-organizers of this briefing, Genocide Watch, World Without Genocide, Indian American Muslim Council, Hindus for Human Rights, International Christian Concern, Jubilee Campaign, 21 Wilberforce, Dalit Solidarity Forum, New York State Council of Churches, International Commission on Dalit Rights, Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations of North America, India Civil Watch International, Center for Pluralism, American Muslim Institutions, Students Against Hindutva Ideology, International Society for Peace and Justice, the Humanism Project, and the Association of Indian Muslims of America. And now, as we conclude, we will take this conversation over on Twitter. And you can join us on the IAMC Council Twitter feed. So if anyone would like to join us, we will go ahead and migrate over there.